I wanted to reflect not just on Adrian but on the broader experience that I had and we had when the organisation I worked with, Impact Solutions with Mary and Adrian. I was lucky enough to be chosen as a participant. It was a new initiative for us as an organisation. It was something different that we'd chosen to do. It was more than we'd ever invested in professional development, and it was different professional development. And for me, I still question why I left teaching. It started a really incredible journey for me. I'm back teaching in a different way now. It led me into management, but I've never seen my role as a manager. I'm not a professional manager. I see my role as providing leadership, and I've been recognised for that in the time since then. I certainly see that it was highly effective for me, but as an organisation, we've been through all sorts of churn, and that churn, whether it's our own issues or whether it's initiated by government, you have to be resilient. Some people think government's a job for life and it's wonderful, but it does take a particular sort of resilience. We've been pulled apart and put back together a number of times since then, and the work we did, what we invested in then, really paid off. Out of that first program that we ran, we formed a tight group of people who used the tools that Mary and Adrian had put together and almost created a common language and a common way of looking at things. And that served us really well. 100% of the people are ever going to get on board. But there were a really good core group of us that went through then some fairly significant change, and we did it together in a really good way. It was a really positive outcome, and a lot of those people have chosen their own journeys since then. I'm probably one of the few that still remain, and whilst I still feel young, I'm often referred to as one of the elders. I'm okay with that. But I do think that the work we did as a group was really formative and powerful. And for me, it connected with the way I learned. This was a really hands-on, practical way to learn things. When we started as a group in this program, we didn't even know each other. We're a big organisation and there were people pulled from all different parts. However, the approach that Mary and Adrian took to form this incredible unity really quickly. And Mary and Adrian were both very different at the time. They took a very different approach. On reading Mary's book, I can see that I was naturally drawn to Adrian. Mary had a far more spiritual side than I thought I had at the time, and probably still have. And some of it scared me at the time. I was really drawn to Adrian. We had some common interests. I'm not a fisherman, but I totally get it and have some really close connections with that pursuit through other people. But I'm a fifth generation Tasmanian. I have a really strong connection with the land here. I could tell even though Adrian doesn't have that long a history here, he got it. He got that really strong connection. And so we had lots of really common interests and things that drew us together. His style, I think, was similar to mine. So we seemed to click well. We worked together in that first stage for a year. And the programs had a residential kind of approach to them, and so it created environments where people bonded and connected and talked and told stories and communicated in all sorts of ways. Some time on, it wasn't early in the piece, something about Adrian that I knew or I remembered, but I didn't know what it was. And it was quite some time. He revealed to me that when he was in he had a gardening business. I had a landscape construction business. And he said to me how he'd remembered me from back then. He'd really admired what I was doing and he aspired to what I was doing. I thought it was funny because from my perspective, what I was doing had fallen in my lap. I don't feel like I did that much to achieve where I was at. It was just time and place, and things happened easily. And I never did get to tell him that it all just fell in my lap. But it did. But yeah, it was funny how that sort of came together. Through that program, we had people that mentored us, and I naturally asked Adrian to work with me, and he did. I didn't feel challenged, and I reflected on that a bit, and I thought, oh, this is good. This is going easy. This isn't as hard as it could be. It took me a while to realise the effect that he'd had on me during that period without me even knowing. It was in subtle, I'm not sure intentionally, I think intuitively it was done in a really subtle way. I started to realise later, and I still reflect on how powerful the work that I did with Adrian and has had on my life changed or brought out things that may not have revealed themselves otherwise. I went on to, as I said earlier, to do further work with Mary and Adrian, and I went on and did a more advanced NLP program with them. I continued in further programs. We must have had some money at the time because we don't invest like that now. But I think we ran 3 programs, and I worked as a mentor on behalf of our organisation. I worked as a mentor with some of our staff under the guidance of Adrian. That presented me with some challenges. You don't know what people have hidden away until you start to have conversations with them and some of those things come out. I worked with some people that had some really challenging experiences in their life, which then challenged me. And it was really good to have Adrian's support through that and to be able to work through that and put it in perspective and give it some context. I was working with a person who had expressed concern to me that they were concerned that they cried too much. And at the time, I'd been doing a lot of crying because I knew stuff was changing in my life, and my mother was diagnosed with cancer. We chose to look after her ourselves and not put her into a home. I went on that journey, and it was while I was doing a lot of personal growth, and it was an emotional thing. So I talked about this with the person that I was working with. My take on it was, of course it's okay. It means that you care. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We talked about it in a pretty open way. Adrian was introducing me to another group of people that we were to work with. He introduced me and he said, "Jon's changed somebody's life." It makes me emotional because I didn't think I did. It made me realise that I'd learnt something from him. I'd just worked with that person in a way that he'd worked with me. I didn't think I did anything. Clearly, those few words that I'd spoken with that person in an uncomplicated, humble kind of did have a significant effect. It made me reflect on how powerful the work that I'd done with Adrian was, even without me knowing. It was done in such a way that the way he had influenced the way I'd worked was powerful. I realised, hang on, I'm not out of my depth. But to hear that feedback publicly took me by surprise. That was one of my really strong reflections about Adrian. The way that he worked with me, and he worked with other people. A lot of the people that worked with him felt the same way. He had this subtle, gentle way of working with people that did affect significant change. And I suppose for me, it just started a journey that significantly changed the direction of my life. All the things that I'm proud of or characteristics I knew I had, I may not have been focusing on them or recognising them. It's interesting, the stuff that Mary's written about dying, because at the time of my mother's death, I was going through this personal change myself, and I was conscious the way I handled that was role modelling how you do dying to my daughter. I was really conscious of that. We did a great job of it. My daughter did oral history with her mum. It was huge. She wrote docs every day from when she could write till she died. And we've still got all that. She insisted on writing more at the end in a condensed version. Ruby had done that with her and recorded it. That was probably one of the first things that made me realise that I was living more consciously. I wasn't just existing and going along and doing stuff. I was starting to make more conscious movements in my life. I've always been a maker and worked in lots of mediums. At the time, I wanted to master something. I wanted to see what that journey was like to master something. It did reveal itself to me over the next few years. Some of that searching and reflection that I was doing at the time led me to that. What I've realised now, having worked with the masters of the craft that I work in all over the world, is that you never master anything. the more you master it, the more you realise that you haven't got enough time left to do it all. And that's a good place to be. I really feel good in that place because I don't have enough time. There's not enough time for me to do the things I want to do. And I think that time really changed the direction of my life. I'd been with my partner for 25 years when 4 or 5 years ago we went our own directions. I think this isn't a bad thing, but 5 or 6 years earlier when I started doing this sort of work, the effect set me in a totally different direction that wasn't the direction that my partner was in. And I think the work I did with Adrian also gave me the ability to live with a strong sense of purpose and a presence and live uncomplicated. My head is a lot less complicated now than it was. Maybe you get that with age anyway. But I don't get tangled up. I don't anticipate stuff. I don't feel a need to plan to prepare too deeply for all sorts of things because I know they're often different to what you prepare for when you get to them. All in all, it was a really formative time for me. I still reflect on how valuable it was. I reflect on that really beautiful, subtle, gentle approach that Adrian had that I connected with that have changed my life.
Wow, beautiful. What was the organisation that you were working with?
Tasmania. When I started the work with Mary and Adrian, I was a horticulture teacher. I now sit in the senior executive, sit next to the CEO. I provide leadership over primary industries, creative industries, hairdressing, funnily enough, and a lot of those design kind of areas, a whole portion of the organisation. And I still think the work I do isn't management, it's leadership. It's what we lack. I work with lots of people with frames all over their walls, but it doesn't make them better leaders. And a lot of the work we did around ego had a strong influence on me, to be able to manage that as you progress in a career, but to be able to recognise it in other people and sift through what motivation is there for things existing and what we're doing, how ethical is it.
Wow, that sounds really, huge, life-changing.
Yeah, it was. I've always had this feeling that there's not enough time. I'm going to leave work fairly soon. I'm going to go back to teaching, but teaching the craft that I work in. I'm a lot more resolute about where I need to go and what I need to fit in. A few things have strongly influenced me. My father died 2 months after he retired. I was only young then, and he was only 60. I see a lot of men particularly men, sit in organisations, and I've seen people with their screensaver on their computer, their superannuation calculator. They think that number is going to change their life. That number's not going to change their life. You'll see those people stay far too long. When you see them later, they haven't got to do the stuff that number was going to let them do. What they've done in sit in lunchrooms is role model to other people. That's the pathway. And so it just goes on. We've got a generation of staff that have got 20 or 30 years still to work with us, and they're already looking at that number instead of getting on with their life and living it today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.